This conference will now be recorded.
Yeah. So before going to any performance engineering process, right, or after completion or during your any of your load testing that is happening, right? Before you do before you define your goals or any of the SLAs, you need to make sure that what architecture that you're using in terms of software and hardware. So you also need to keep in mind that whatever the architecture that is using, that will work fine with whatever the different number of users that you're testing. And also you need to check for the feasibility of different scalabilities that you do. Okay, like you test with some 1,000 users or 2,000 users, but over a particular period of time you may see some resource crunch issues from different areas of the infrastructure. It can be any of the CPU or memory or network and disk from any server that is there from your infrastructure. So what you need to do is you need to define your goals. You need to understand the hardware and software capacity of your infrastructure, of what are all the different web app DB servers that are being used. Also, the number of load generators that you're using, you need to primarily understand the memory footprints. Okay, as I told you earlier, like for each of the protocol that you're using, each protocol will have a different memory footprint. Okay, for example, if you take web HTTP HTML, that is a different one. AJAX True Client is a very heavyweight protocol. It will need a lot many load generators in terms of hardware and software. For example, if you're running a load test with 800 users, you will be needing some you will need some 8 to 10 load generators if you're doing stress testing or something. So in that aspect you need to define, you need to get some detailed understanding from the architecture design side of what architecture is being used. And it also you also need to consider about how, in what way you can scale it for your future data growth. Okay, for both physical resource usage, also the capacity or everything that you need to consider from right from the load generators that you're using, the client machine that you're using, the type of browsers that you're using. When you talk something about architecture, you have to you have to take every key point as your input, especially when you design this architecture. Okay, and for the very first time you attend this meeting, right, the architecture design meeting, it is not the only single performance engineer who is defining this. It has lot many parameters actually. When you decide this particular architecture with this size or with this capacity that has to be used, you have a checklist for that before you define any of the architecture. You'll have memory footprints, you'll talk to business analysts, some functional experts, and you also you will have technical architects, and most of the times the performance consultant or SME or architect will be involving in this particular phase of architecture design.
Excuse me,
Okay,
RK.
yes, please.
Yeah, when we are talking about the browsers, right, it could be Mozilla or Chrome, whatever it is. But those browsers, I'm not sure, maybe I'm missing something. Only during the recording only we need to care about, unless you go for a true client. But when you go for the web client, basically it is the only the server response, right? We will be calculating anyway. The rendering we are not calculating, right? Then do we really need to consider, okay, which browser they are using, especially
Yes,
when you go for the web protocol?
yes, we should. That is why the reason client-side performance testing also came into picture. Earlier, every team assumption is like 85% of the issues are only just happening just because of the server side. So it is not from the server side. We are also seeing so many issues from the client side, especially from the browser. As you told just now, it is all about the running time, page load time. So there are other parameters which has so many of issues from the client side. So I'll explain you that in detail in client side performance testing. There is a tool for that. So I'll highlight the difference there and I'll explain you in the client side performance testing class. Okay. So considering the browsers, right? Browsers usage also, that is one of the main important parameter that we guys have to define in the workload model, because you never know, like if you have the maximum handling capacity of the application is 10,000 users, it doesn't mean that all the 10,000 users are using the same browser in real time, right? So the load also will be distributed across different browsers.
Right, right. So my question was that was something at the back end I'm talking about. See, while I am scripting, so I'm going to use, let's say, Chrome or IE, right? But when I am running my test in the controller, I don't need to worry about the browser, isn't it? The browser
Yes.
I will be using during the recording only. That's it. Then after that, I don't need to worry about it when I am looking at the web protocol I'm talking about. So
Right.
that's where my question was. Do I need to worry about when I am going for a web protocol? Do I need to worry about the browser? Yes, so whatever you mentioned, the client side performance testing, we need to consider. That should be fine. But when I'm talking about the web protocol, do I need to worry about the browser? Because browser just for recording only. That's it. Then
Right,
after that,
because
when you run the controller, you don't need to worry about at all about the browser.
but
That's my question.
no, when you record, you also need to check the browser that you're recording, because you will have the too much of HTML content and non-HTML generated elements like ActiveX controls, Java applets, and other stuff. Okay, so you will not be able to, if you want to record the exact simulation of the page that the user is actually trying to do in real time. If you want to record that, you also need to check of all the different elements that you have in a web page. That as Loadrunner is a third-party tool, at times it may not capture all the different elements that we have across a web page. So most of the times, everyone's best practice as a recommendation is all the applications will be recorded in IE. Not if you go back and check, they will not be
Correct,
recorded in Chrome or Firefox.
correct. Agreed.
What IE will do is IE will capture. IE has got so many compatibility features. You can set some security settings, and you have some custom site settings. You can also allow some credentials into it. You can do all that stuff in Internet Options page from the IE, and it has the capability of recording everything there. Okay, that is why the reason you select only IE when you're recording. I'm not saying that you don't do it on Chrome. You can also do it on Chrome or any custom browser like Firefox or Brave or whatever different browsers that you have. But it will not capture majority of the web elements, web page elements from the page. Especially if you take any of the .NET based applications, Java applications to some extent, every browser has some compatibility and it can record everything. And the first time when you replay it, if it is not having any correlation issues, the first time when you replay it, it will work on any browser. But if you take .NET applications, all the elements in a .NET application will not get recorded in a Firefox or Chrome. You have to definitely use this IE. Okay, and there are different parameters like SSL versions, HTML versions, different handshakes. So you need to check all of them, and accordingly you have to use the browser to record all the activity from the requirement side if you want to meet some SLA.
Okay, sir, how do we like emulate, like we have browser emulation to emulate with different browsers like Mozilla, Chrome or something else. So how does that help when we use while replaying?
See, if you I mean while replaying, yeah. So that is purely a requirement again. If you look at any of the workload modeling, right? If you take any workload, like out of 1,000 users or out of 100 users, all the users will not be accessing the same functionality. First point. Second point is all the users will not be using the same speed. All the users will not be using the different, the same operating system. All the users will not be using the same RAM or CPU. All the users will not be using the same browser. When this comes, right, so if there is a requirement as such, we have to test with different browsers. We have to work on, we have to record that on different browsers, and you have to execute the test. So if you want to bring the exact simulation of the browsers that you want to use in your load test, there is a different concept. I have to share that document. such that document, there is one specific test that you are only focusing on. If you have 100 users load test, some people are using the Safari browser, Firefox, IE, and Google Chrome. With all the 4 browsers, there is a scenario for testing with 100 users. If your motto or goal is only to test with different the load simulation with different browsers, users using different browsers, then you can do that. But it is not necessarily you can bring all the browsers into picture. You need not run that. Even if you take all the students who are attending this class, I'm sure that no one has done that. So all must be doing your recording on IE, and you'll be running the same, you'll be executing the same test with n number of users in controller or performance center or Storm Runner Cloud, if I'm correct. Am I right?
Correct.
Right. Did anyone do that, like simulating all the different browsers?
From my end, not really.
No, right? So this is not when something called client-side performance testing, people started adopting that. Now they are worried about whatever the browser that you are testing, that you are recording and you are executing. There is a separate concept of something called client-side performance testing. From there, they are improving all of the stuff from all the different browsers, all the different HTML content, JavaScript files. They are using minifiers. They are optimizing from the browser end. They are doing all this activity from the server side. Okay. So for the question that you asked, Silva, like I'll share you the document with you. Yesterday and from the last 3 weeks, I was out of last 3 days I was out of station, so I could not share any of the documents. I'll share it today. Okay. Yeah. So
Yeah, sure.
whatever
So,
questions we have,
sorry.
we will talk in the end of the session, because it is taking too much of time for others. Actually, some people have to leave to office by 8:30 or 9. So once the session is completed, we can have the question and answer session. You can make your questions handy. You can make a note of it. At the end of the session, you can ask. Okay.
Perfect.
Okay. Thank you. Now, when we talk about architecture design, it is not that every performance engineer who has got some 10 years or 12 years will wantedly do it. But when I hire someone into a product-based company, I always keep asking every associate that comes for an interview, what is an architecture design? What are your different considerations when you design an architecture? So when you create your own test dedicated environment for doing all your performance testing activities, how do you design your architecture? These are all the various questions that I ask different people who come for interviews, especially when they say that 8 years experienced in different roles like performance test lead or individual contributor, or if they are calling themselves as a one man who is working in the entire life cycle implementation. So I keep all the different questions. Okay. So the basic thing that there are different things that you need to understand from architecture design. So before you design architecture, you need to, the first point is you need to understand the workload. Okay. So what is the workload that you have, and you need to have your own estimations from an individual component. If you remember in the last class, I spoke about different timing targets, right? So you also need to identify that what are the different advantages or merits or demerits if I am creating a setup and executing a test on-premise setup or on a cloud setup, or if I want to migrate something. So last time, every time before you create an environment, right? You design your architecture. The first thing that you need to do is you need to get the feedback from the real users. This is the most important point. So whatever the issues or whatever the stopping points or degradations that you see from the real time, the users see from the real time, you document all of them, and you make sure that you are avoiding all those bottlenecks when you test in your the mirror image of production environment. Okay. You need to understand what are the different design patterns, algorithms, and data structures that are being used from the coding side, from the development side. You also need to understand the architectural limits. For example, when I say architectural limits, right? In architectural limits, there is something like how many. There is something like if I want to generate a load of 500 users from a specific load generators, how much RAM and CPU do I need? Anyone have some idea on that? I have 2000 users that I have to test. Uh, I have to use only 3 load generators or 5 load generators. How can I design my load generator configuration here?
It depends on, as you just mentioned in the initially also, depends on what protocol you are using. That is the first thing we need to look into, either it is Citrix or TrueClient or web. If it is a web, okay, usually a standard load generator, it's going to handle between 200 to 300 users, roughly. Now now they became powerful. Maybe it could handle 500 also. It depends. So we need to look into that. But besides, running a single user or something and see what are the footprints also. That also we can take into consideration.
Right, there is a separate process for that. Okay, there are lot many processes. So to determine the number of load generators, right? It can be two. You can have 2 generators, you can have 5 generators, or you can have 10 load generators for 2000 users. It all depends on the hardware software configuration that you are using for a specific load generators. Every time, if you want to define a specific number of load generators that are required, the first thing that you have to do is you need to record a script using that specific protocol that you're using. It can be web or it can be Ajax or RDP, whatever the protocol. Okay, you have to replay that script with single user in the controller, and you need to check the average CPU and the peak memory consumption of that mdrv.exe. You are aware of that, right? mdrv.exe driver file.
Yep.
So there is also there is a counter for that, something like percentage processor time and private bytes. If you look at that, for a single user, when you run a test for 5 minutes or 10 minutes, you need to check the average CPU and the peak memory consumption of that mdrv.exe process. You can check this utilization and consumption of this mdrv process only by adding some counters called percentage processor time and private bytes. Okay, based on your load generator hardware and the CPU and memory consumption of a single user, you have to calculate the number of users per machine, and accordingly you need to define the hardware and software configuration of that particular load generator. You understood, right?
Right, but I mean, I should not ask you that question. Memory, it makes sense, but how about the CPU?
CPU also will be calculated per each user, right?
Right,
CPU
but
is an average for all the different for all the number of users that you have in your machine. So
right.
for every test, are you not calculating the CPU? Are you not monitoring the CPU
Yes,
percentage?
yes, we do. But what I was asking is, if it's a memory footprint, say if the single user is taking 5 MB, then it is 100 users. Then I can say 5 GB or something. That's at least to a number. But when it goes to the CPU, how you are going to calculate? We are going to add all together 500 users when it is 10% of CPU for a single user. That's not right. I mean, how we are going to do that? Is there any calculation?
There is a different calculation for that. Again, at the end of the session, if someone picks me like how to calculate the number of load generators, that is the first document, and also I spoke about the second document, right? How to load test with the different browsers. Okay. If someone sends me a message on my WhatsApp of both the document names, I'll share the documents. Okay, it will clearly say how you have to define your CPU. Okay, I'll show you that in hardware sizing as well. Okay, so that is how you will understand all the different design patterns, algorithms, and you got nothing to do with design patterns and algorithms and data structures, as most of the performance engineers are not aware of what are the different practices that development team is using. Okay, and accordingly, once you get all these architectural limits or memory footprints and the detailed workload information, then they will create the documentation part, and they will give you all the high level information about design and sizing. Okay, when comes to the architecture design, right? Mostly what we verify is we'll before we go ahead with performance testing activities, we will review the architecture completely with respect to the configurations, the connection establishments, and what are all the different the deployments that happened with respect to WAR file or EA or enterprise edition file of that application, how it is configured. So we also cross check that what are all the configuration settings that we have in the test environment are same as prod environment. We also check if the logging, the explicit logging is disabled or enabled. And once the document is ready from all the different teams, we will take a sign off on the architecture and the design implementation and other hardware requirements that are stated in the document. And there will be some kind of agreement on the usage of all the common tools that we are using in load testing. Okay, we will get a sign off from the customer. Okay, once we get a sign off from the customer, there is like entry criteria and exit criteria, like in test plan for the hardware sizing and architecture design as well. The entry criteria is like to design the architecture, you need to have the business requirement documents, like high level requirements and low level high level design documents and low level design documents, and the requirement analysis documents, and you need to have the complete technical architectural understanding on the application with respect to user roles, use cases, and user concerned scenarios, high prioritized functionalities, and that is the entry criteria to design all this documentation. And the exit criteria is you should have the hardware sizing document report, and you need to have this code profiling methodology and what are the different types of tools that are used for doing all the code profiling. Okay, so as I told you, the first point, when you have this workload modeling, right, workload analysis and translation, uh, you need to have, if you as yesterday, if you remember, I have shown you one document, right? Look at this document. It is trying to get the customer details. Okay, a simple web page request from the browser. It will result in two HTTP requests to the web server. Okay, one for the core page itself and another for an image. Okay, those are two requests which got splitted. One is for bringing the response back, and the other one is for bringing the image that is associated with it. And there are two other requests of the application server invoking two methods. It is doing two calls there, so that it can do that activity and it can bring the response back. And there are another two requests which are hitting the database, which are two independent SQL queries that are being executed, and you get the final response. So here, the reason why you are understanding all this information is because how many HTTP requests you have here. Okay, it is a one single use case, and you have two HTTP requests, and it can also tell you the number of hits. If you understand how many HTTP requests that you have in a use case, accordingly you also can give the target estimation of that specific HTTP request, whatever the response it is requesting. If you look this image, right, as I told you, the target estimation, if you take any of the response time of any particular transaction, it is always 3 to 5 seconds. If there is no SLA from your client, if you have 1 lakh users or 1.5 lakh users or 2,000 users, 3,000 users, the standard SLA of any complex scenario, making a payment or booking a ticket or buying an insurance policy or booking a product on a Black Friday, for anything across the world, okay, uh, the standard SLA in terms of response times is only 3 to 5 seconds. Okay, if you look at 3 seconds, this is how you need to understand the overall response time targets, and you also need to understand how much each tire it is taking, how much time it is taking. In the below example, it is 3 seconds we are targeting. The 1 second from web to app, and 1 second from app to web, and the remaining 1 second for processing from the client side, which is actually going from the firewall side or from the load balancer, and how the load balancing method. The remaining 1 second is taking part of all the different activities. So when you define the timing target of 3 seconds here, when you test with multiple users, you see some 5 to 6 seconds here. So if they are optimizing this specific specific numbers at the component level, like 0.5 seconds from web to app and 0.5 seconds from app to web, then you can target for something called 4 to 4.5 seconds of response time. So if you don't understand this if you don't understand this target estimations or the workload conversions and uh, other numbers at the different tier levels, so you cannot go and say to the customer that I can give you a response time of 4 to 4.5 seconds when I test with 2,500 users. That is not possible. So it will be an escalation again if you do that. So it is very important to understand. So the timing targets in the architecture from the architecture design phase. If you don't get a chance to review or take part of this architecture design documentation, always get in touch with your SMEs and architects or business stakeholders to understand the different timing targets. Also bring your development team into this meeting and get a detailed understanding so that you will not see any major performance bottlenecks. So without understanding all this information, you continuously do some n number of testings. I conduct some 5 to 6 rounds of testing, and I say that the performance is not being optimized. I have taken multiple heap dumps or multiple thread dumps. I have added processors. I have added memory slots. I have done vertical and horizontal scaling. It is not going less than 4 seconds. You need to understand the reason why. When you go back and do the client side performance testing, you get in touch with the front end UI UX developers. You get some optimizations there, and you still do another round of testing. You will not see less than 4 seconds of response time. This is called a hidden bottleneck. The reason is because you did not get the complete information of what exactly is the timing target and the estimation value from tier to tier level, the component level. You don't get this information, or if you don't have this information, if you don't understand the base numbers of the code for getting executed, for getting compiled, or to run that particular functionality, if it is the base numbers are 2.5 seconds, you cannot bring that response time to 3 seconds when you're testing with 2,000 or 3,000 users. So that is why the reason every point from the workload modeling, every point from the architecture designing, every point from the application traversal, detailed understanding on the architecture is required for every performance engineer. Okay, and the third point is you have to talk about scalability. The question is now I have a question for you. Why scalability is important? Why do I need to consider scalability when I'm designing my architecture?
Making sure the application is scalable. I mean, let's say you have the users are in next quarter or something. It could be increasing. So you need to make sure that application and also the infrastructure is scalable. So
Right.
if not, then you are going to stuck here itself before the next quarter.
Yep, you are right. Perfect. So the main reason we are considering scalability here is because you cannot create the environment again and again, right? So I mean, it will be very it is a very difficult task to recreate the exact mirror image of a prod like environment. It is not that easy. It is not really easy. So it is always a very big challenge even when you define your non-functional test plan estimation itself, they give a separate buffer time for creating to have a prod like size environment. If you are really defining that environment, you need to spend a lot of time to understand most of the things. What are the different versions, or what are the different servers versions, software versions that you're using, and bring that replicate will take too much of time. So when you talk about scalability, so you need to understand the data growth of that particular application. What is the data growth that we can expect in the next quarter, or the next 6 months, or down the line the next 1 year? Okay, so every time you have to test, right? If you want to test with, if you have an environment only for 2000 users, all of a sudden the user growth has been increased and the data growth has been increased. And if your customer wants to test with multiplied by 2 scenario, you should have that infrastructure, right? So in such cases, you also need to check the feasibility of the scalability. Even if you have my environment, the exact replica in future, in the near future, how can I scale it? Is there any possibility of scaling it without any issues or without any interruptions? So in such cases, you check how can I do the horizontal scaling and vertical scaling. So most of you are aware of horizontal scaling and vertical scaling, right? By
Yep, but not sure other team members. Yeah.
by looking at this diagram, you can easily understand. You can go through this document as well. So horizontal scaling is you will add another cluster or another load balancer or anything. So vertical scaling is only adding the CPU and memory disks on a particular box, but horizontal scaling is like you add another server. Okay, it's very simple. So and yeah, synchronous and asynchronous, you really don't need it. I mean, you can just go through it. So like depending upon your scalability requirements and process and other transactions, you can identify which is synchronous and asynchronous. So architectural limits, as I told you, here there is one specific example I wrote here. Okay, so the processing limits for a particular component of any proposed architecture, there is something called maximum TCP buffer size, which is 1 MB, and maximum cache size should be less than 2 GB for 32-bit environment, and maximum DB transactions around 5K to 10K. If I don't think so, for whatever the DBs that you're using for all your load testing activities, it will not be some 5K to 10K. It will be approximately 50K to 100K when you test with banking applications or any payment applications or continuous, e-commerce applications. It will take too much of max cache or TCP buffer size. These are all, there is something called memory footprint checklist document with respect to architectural limits. So depending upon the user load, depending upon the number of hits, number of transactions and other stuff, you give that values. And it is not the performance engineer who will decide all that values. There is a separate team, okay, who particularly work with tools team, who will dedicatedly work with environment team and tools team. They have some calculations with the type of softwares and software versions or web app DB servers that you're using, and accordingly they go ahead, they plan, and they will give that values. And if we see any issues with any of any bottlenecks and other issues, for the very first time when we start our test in the initial 15 minutes for 20 users or 15 users, we go back and we integrate our APM solutions to see what is happening for the first 15 minutes from all the different areas. Especially when we design all this architecture design for the very first time, we will have a continuous monitoring on the infrastructure, on the environment. We will run only for 15 minutes to see how each metric on the infrastructure is behaving, what are all the values that you are seeing. Okay, this is all about architectural design, and we have something called hardware sizing. Hardware sizing is not revealed. Okay, hardware sizing I just have written it at a very high level. Hardware sizing is not, there is no specific thumb rule, and that will not be disclosed. Even we have our own hardware sizing practices. Okay, we will not, no organization or no client will reveal that how the hardware is calculated, because they can copy the same mechanism of hardware sizing of that particular instance, and they can some other vendor from other company can come up with that plan. So hardware sizing is one of the most important aspect of any performance testing and engineering practice, because whatever they are defining here, it has so many performance improvements from this hardware sizing estimation. So when you have a sizing model, these are all the key areas that you need to focus on: the workload and the transaction complexity and the performance targets and technical architecture, and there is something called validation model and the CPU, memory, disk, and network. Okay, especially with the storage concepts. And you know what? The sizing model is built on the continuous monitoring feedback. So whatever the feedbacks that we get from the monitoring teams on the real-time users, accordingly we go and we decide what are all the different sizings that I can give on all these different areas. Okay, so if you look at something called TPMC, transactions per minute, TPC benchmark, I think I shared you this one, right? There are some standards. Okay, so for the hardware configurations, the most popular reference of any of the application that is newly coming into the market, they'll go visit this site. There is something called TPCA, TPCB, TPCC, and transactions per second of, there are some ratings of what hardware that we can use with all the parameters that I have shown just now. How we can decide, you can go through this site and you can see it. So if a new vendor or new customer, if he's not getting any of the help from anyone, he will take the help of this tpc.org. Here you have TPC technology. You will have so many benchmarks. Okay, these are all different standards, transactions per. These transactions per second. It has so many different strategies here. So there are how you can decide the transaction. How you can decide the TPC ratings with respect to A, B, and C, how you can do that with all the tech stacks that you're using in your infrastructure. You can get all the information here. You can also create a member login and you can contact this guy. There is some pay model for this. You can go back and you can ask. So you can take some kind of bench lining and base marking, and you can they will define the transactions response times and how you can create your hardware sizing model. They can help you with all the establishment of what sizing you can have with this many users and what kind of response times you can achieve. These are all this is all the information that you can get from basically this is get from TPMC. Basically this is used for benchmarking. Okay, by majority of the hardware vendors, they use all these TPMC techniques and ratings to rate their machines on different specifications and requirements that they have. Yeah, and we have spoke about lot of stuff here: hardware sizing, performance in fundamentals engineering, architecture design. So we have spoke about lot of things. What did you understand? One thing in common. This is a question to all of you. So we have spoke about before from the last 4 to 5 sessions. We spoke a lot. We spoke about performance engineering, right? So we have one point in common for all the concepts that we are talking. What is that?
Could be
Yes, any answer is fine,
what
but
um, it could be volume of the what you call transactions or something, a kind of load model.
yes,
We can say that load model.
right.
I was
Whatever
trying to
you
for the
see,
right word, load model.
right. Whatever you are seeing it on the screen, the workload estimation, right? If you don't
Oh
know how
yeah,
to
right.
create a model, if you don't know what is workload model, if you don't know what is your requirement, or if you, I mean, there are, we spoke about the different scenarios, right? The first case is your customer will directly give you an SLA. The second case is your customer doesn't know anything about application. It is you who has to define the requirements for the application which is already there in production. The third case is the customer don't know anything. The application is not there in production and it is the first time you are testing it. The fourth case is your client doesn't know anything about the application. Even the application is not in live. It is just the first phase of application is functionally tested. Now the customer is asking you to performance test it. There is no baseline or benchmark. There is the base version is ready. There is no application. There is no application in live now. The first phase of functional is completed. You have to do some performance testing. Once it goes live, then you have to again do performance testing. The second phase, third phase. So there are multiple requirements. Okay. If you say that, if someone says that I have taken the complete ownership of creating the workload model, I evaluate that guy in all the different directions with all these four scenarios. Okay. So think time calculation, basic calculations, how to do this hardware sizing, how to calculate the number of load generators required for my load testing. So how do I identify my workload? How do I identify my key performance indicators? How do I define my SLAs, my goals? How do I identify the peak end of peak hours, the web interactions, the number of concurrent users, communication with external systems, the data growth, the user growth in the next quarterly or half-yearly or yearly, the data volumes. So if you don't have all this information, or if you don't know what is workload model, the in and out of workload model, you will not be able to uh, do the efficient load testing. Even if you do it, if you don't have a valid workload model practice in your performance testing and engineering activities, the end result of your performance testing, the load testing that you ran for 8 hours or 10 hours is failed. Okay, there is no use of doing it, because I see many of the projects, the customer doesn't know anything about the performance testing. So whatever the performance engineer is suggesting, he will blindly follow that. It's his money. You can work in that project for a year or for 2 years, or with that company for 6 months or 7 months. But when you go to a specific project, when you go to a challenging assignment, that is an evaluation for your experience and for your skills. You need to ask a question to yourself that, am I doing my performance testing right? Am I following the right approach, or am I going with some misguided approach which will end up without improving any of the numbers? You are not doing that, right? So when you are in a project, when the customer is completely assuming that you are the caretaker of his application in terms of performance, you need to understand the complete end-to-end scenarios of that application. You need to you need to be very clear on the workload model. You need to create a very efficient workload model. There is something called TPS. Some customers come back to me and ask, boss, I need only this TPS. TPS is 0.8 seconds. You test with how many hours you want, you do it. How many number of users you do it. I want to achieve this TPS, but the minimum user base is 1000 users. This is how I get requirements. So some customers say that my database CPU should not exceed more than 45%. I don't let my response times be 14 or 15 seconds. I don't worry about that. My database should not exceed, my resource utilization of my database should not exceed 45%, more than 45%. You test with 25,000 users now. I don't want, don't worry about failed transactions. Don't worry about errors. Errors is always, the error rate should be always less than 5%. Everyone is aware of that, right? The error rate should be less than 5%. So the reason why I'm explaining all this stuff is because you need to have detailed understanding on the workload modeling, how you can create workload model, how you can create the capacity model, how you can create, how you can do the efficient scaling, how you can do the vertical and horizontal scaling, the hardware sizing, the architectural designing. These are all interlinked. The prerequisite to understand all these areas is only you need to have this workload model. Okay. I also give some. You can prepare workload model tomorrow. I can give you some questions tomorrow. Okay. I'll create some questions. I can give you some questions to you. At least if you don't know where to start to prepare with workload estimation or workload model, you can start working from that questions. We'll have top 10 questions in workload modeling. If you start finding answers for that 10 questions, you will learn all the workload modeling. Okay. So again, building the CPU sizing model, depending upon the workload specifications, by taking the help of, if I'm using a reference from the TPMC, I build my CPU sizing accordingly, but I have never done the CPU model sizing building. So there is a team who is taking care of it, and there are few inputs which are not shared again. No organization has shared all these techniques to me. Even if you say I'm a performance engineer, I need to understand how the CPU sizing model is built. They say that even if it's for a test environment, we are not. There are no trainings for that as well. They don't give trainings. They don't share that information. Okay. So the memory is like memory, as someone explained just now. Someone gave me an answer, right? So memory footprints we can directly multiply it depending upon the protocol that we're using. For simple application, 1 GB per CPU is sufficient, or for moderate applications, it is 2 GB per CPU. Very complex application, it is 4 GB per CPU. This is I have written at a very high level, but again, we are using some 16 GBs and 32 GBs also for some complex applications. So when you define this hard disk, right, you have again several factors, different factors. Before you decide this, you take logs from the production. Okay? So how much there is another DBA team who is specifically monitoring all these logs, indexes utilizations, instances utilizations, operating system utilizations, queries utilizations. So considering all these factors, they will decide the disk for what disk they can use for their database, because storage is one of the important factor for any database, because it deals with trillions and trillions of records, right? Especially in the production databases and production like databases, when it is dealing with trillions and millions of data. So the first primary factor is always storage, which keeps storing all this data for a period of time. So this is there is no limitation as such. Again, it has some different rules for defining the hard disk. So the network bytes bandwidth sizing, they really don't do it for our performance testing projects. They use the same bandwidth, and even if you remember that option, use maximum bandwidth from runtime options from any version of load runner. that will try to utilize the maximum bandwidth that the application has got. So it will accommodate. You can also, when you do some stress testing or limited connectivity testing, you can customize your bandwidth and you can give the bandwidth value there. Apart from that, you will in all the 99.9% percentage of the scenarios, you will be using the maximum utilization of the bandwidth that is available for your application testing. Okay, so most of you must have this question actually: how do I deal with batch processing requirements? So batch processing requirements has to be considered before the architecture design, before you build some hardware sizing CPU model or any of the resource model. You have to consider all the parameters here. And if you have 4 batch windows in a day in 24 hours of time frame, you need to identify that time frames, and you need to, what they do is they monitor for a week the production infrastructure, right? They monitor all the servers for a week. They'll monitor in the peak and off peak situations, and then they come with the sizing practices here. Okay, if more processing power is required, because not every batch window will have the same amount of content, right? Let's say that if you have an ICICI NEFT or Citibank NEFT window, it happens for every 3 years of time. If you look at any of the NEFT transaction, the third party vendor to whom you are transferring the funds, you will get the credit in the next 3 years, not more than 3 years. It means that to 8 times in a day, right? 8 times in a day. So here what you need to understand is every batch window will not have the same amount of requests or load. If you look at evening times, right? How many of the people will transfer after 11 o'clock in the night? I don't, very less, some 5 to 15% of the users. How many of the people will actually do this transaction in the morning time? It is very high, some 45 to 55%. So they'll apply different loads on this batch processing windows, and they will check the utilization of the CPU, hard disk, memory, and network, and they also check the processing power. Most of the time when the bulk data is pushed onto a server, right? So it will take so much of time, or sometimes there are chances of being stuck. Even if you look at something called Google Pay, right? If you send some funds, there is something called stuck payments. Most of the times the bank server is not available, or the payment is being stuck. What to do with stuck payments? It is nothing but some concurrency is huge, and it's some kind of a batch load. So when you talk about this non-functional requirement gathering, before understanding the requirements, or before you move with all the performance testing activities, you need to understand the batch processing requirements as well. So how many times in a day this batch processing happens, how much the minimum data that you send in one batch processing requirement, and what is the maximum data. So what happens if a batch processing is failed? Okay, because all the times it cannot be, it is not a performance issue, or it is not a performance bottleneck. Because if the data is huge, and if the more data is published or pushed as a part of batch processing, it is not a performance issue. It is already an application issue which is not able to process your batch processing, right? It can be that, it can happen because of that issue as well. Batch processing issues are not always performance issues. Processing issues also, the application will not be able to handle such kind of huge load, and it will not be able to process, and the server is not available. If it is reaching beyond the anticipated capacity, any server if you take cannot handle. The logic is simple. It is not the performance issue. Okay. So final configuration is this is the model. You can go through this one. Customer, the proposal team. These are all the different teams that are involved. You validate sizing, compute There are proposal teams. There are some teams who will baseline, benchmark. There is a capacity teams who takes care of all the scalings and other stuff. Okay, so those teams will actually take care of all these things, and they will give you the final model. And once you have all these things ready, actual performance engineering starts. Okay, it is required for every performance engineer to get to verify. Even if you don't get a chance to work, instead of saying, "Sir, I did not get a chance to work on it. I did not get an opportunity." Don't search for an opportunity. Create an opportunity. So talk to different teams. When you are involved as a one-man performance engineer, you have the access. You have the right to ask. You have the right to ask all the questions from any team that are who are working for your project. Okay, so it is not like you will never, if you are scripting, you will if you're, there are few clients which will not release you. Okay, no company will hire you if you give me a 3 months notice. Honestly, no. My own company now, they have three months notice. We are not looking for associates who can join in 3 months of time. I am looking an associate for who can join in 1 month of time. So even if you want to think of some good opportunity, right, it will be very hard for you. There are few clients which did not release associates for years. I have seen people, some 10 years people or 12 years people who are working in the same project, doing scripting, correlation, execution, and publishing a report. So always my suggestion to all of you is add knowledge to your experience rather than adding years to your experience. So performance engineering is always required. So if you don't understand all of these areas, at least get some good knowledge, get some good hands-on, try to understand all these areas. And once you apply some job for another opportunity outside your company, right, then it will definitely help you. Trust me, because most of the people, most of the companies are now paying. I've seen people actually performance testing with engineering for a product-based company. The average salary of 5 years of associate is 21 lakhs now. I don't know about the service-based companies. Service-based companies is a different road. So take part of in all the performance engineering activities. I will share you all the sufficient information. Check each and every point. You can always call me after 8 o'clock if you have any issues. If you have any questions in specific with respect to your individual requirements, or if you see any challenges, I can help you. You can call me anytime. After 8, I'll be available from 8 p.m. I'll be available till 11:30 p.m. in the evening. So you can call me. Or if something urgent, you can call me. You can WhatsApp me on my number. Okay, I'll respond on that. Okay. So you guys have any questions now?
Yes, RK. So initially that I'm not sure that cross-browser. This is what the question raised initially. You mentioned, after at the end of the class.
Okay. So what is your question now? So
To be honest, it was not my question. Even I don't have a clear picture on that. The other person, yeah, this is what he asked actually. Even I tried to catch it, but I was not able to. Multiple browsers, how you can test it or something he asked. So I didn't remember if he's in the call.
Yeah, my question was, this is Chelva. So my question was here, like we have browser emulation in the Vuegen. So where we have option of using multiple browser settings and then run it. So how that we can use it for a different, actually he has given some answers regarding that. Already he has provided some information. So he has asked me to get some document also on that. So that was my question, that how do we use based upon the Vusion settings?
Okay, so there is, yeah, as you said, there is that option, and even if you take JMeter, right, there is a option for simulating all the real browsers. So whatever the request that you are creating, right, you can simulate the real browser simulation. So there is a separate testing that happened. I don't remember at the moment. There are some different browser level users that is there actually, the current protocol level users. So I'll send you the document. I'll explain you tomorrow because I don't remember that at the moment. So there is some specific options that you need to set when you test it. Yeah, we'll talk about this thing tomorrow. I'll clarify this question tomorrow. There is a specific setting to simulate the exact simulation of all the browsers, including iOS browser. The white paper, I can share you that, and I'll explain you that tomorrow. Okay.
So,
Okay. Yeah, sure.
okay, so regarding that TPS and that stuff you mentioned regarding that workload model, right? Let's say client says, okay, the TPS, what you take it, but I want the TPS 5. This is what you mentioned, but that is
Right.
what at the end anyway, so we need to honor the client. But there are other things also we need to take into consideration. Do we need to explain them or just to focus on 5 TPS? You said, I know, okay, my database should not cross more than 5
Actually,
TPS.
see, there are here we have two cases. Okay, the first thing is the client will not listen to anyone. Okay, if there is a strong requirement from his teams, he'll ask you to do that. So it is your job again to make the customer to understand why you are. You need to ask him why you want 5 TPS in specific. What is the reason? You need to ask that, because he'll ask you 10 TPS, he'll ask you 0.2 TPS. 0.2 TPS is highly impossible task for 10,000 users if you take. You can't do that. There will be a lot of calculations when calculating your think time and pacing and TPS, right? Cannot achieve whatever the TPS that is defined by the customer. You need to ask the customer, why do you need 5 TPS or 10 TPS? You have to ask why. So even that is why baselining and benchmarking plays a very crucial role in any performance testing project. When you test with when you do some pilot runs with 5 users, 25 users, and 100 users, right? So you will get the basic TPS, right? But with that TPS, you will calculate the remaining TPS, and you will tell the feasibility, or you will tell what are all the different numbers that you can achieve. TPS 10 TPS, whatever he is asking, it is highly impossible. So you need to understand from his side, and you need to talk about your own requirements, and you need to clear, as a performance engineer, you need to clearly explain what are all the possible scenarios that you can accomplish.
Perfect.
Okay, so most of you have attended Kumar sir load training, right? He must be covering all these things, workload modeling and all. How many of you guys have attended? You must have attended this class, right? I think some people are there actually. Yes, Yogesh, the meeting is on. The meeting is recorded. Okay, any other questions? Forgot to get introduced to everyone. I thought of asking.
Yeah, one thing, RK. So I see that day 1, day 2, day 3. You know, the day 1. I mean, because I keep going, so it's going to be increase the number, right? But what happened is the date was some, misleading. 14th it was day 2, 13th was day 3. Kind of that's what I see. I would request just make sure that those days of sessions.
No, actually, I'm not giving the naming conventions. It is Anita ma'am who is giving it. So I'll ask her to do it. Okay.
Okay.
So you are talking about the naming conventions only, right? The
Right.
day 1,
So
day
what
2.
happened was it was on 14th. What she mentioned was day 2, then the 11th it is day 3. It should be increasing order, right? So just make sure if in the order.
Sure thing. So I'll ask her to do that.